Hey, gang. My name's Jurgs. I'm going to be taking you through why you would want to consider taking your podcast and being on the radio, and the likelihood and preference of probably doing both. First of all, a podcast comes to you via an RSS feed. That stands for Really Simple Simulcasting. That is actually the original definition of RSS. There's another one now that's much more technical that somebody else thought was more appropriate. But in all actuality, when Apple designed the podcast, that's what it really stood for. Podcasts are on demand whenever you want them, and they constitute a play when that podcast episode is consumed. Now, what exactly is a play? Play is defined as a stream of the episode for at least 60 seconds or longer, or downloading the episode to a device to be played later. Whether or not it's ever played, nobody's ever going to know. But it's presumed that if it's downloaded to the device, it's going to be played. Plays are tabulated automatically via the IP address of the user and other data pushed back via the RSS feed, such as demographics of the user, where that person is at, etc. Now, let's take a look at radio. There's AM, FM, and internet. For purposes of space, AM and FM is actually what we call terrestrial radio. Internet radio is internet radio. There used to be something called digital radio, something that you could get through a specific type of radio device that received a digital, not a radio frequency. These have become outdated, especially because internet radio can now be used via your smartphone. Through radio, you get a live broadcast. That happens on a schedule at a particular time, so it's not on demand. In all actuality, it might not also be live either. Jurg's Radio, for example, takes podcasts, repurposes them, and plays them through an automated system so that it gets exposure for that podcast so you, the listener, can find that podcast at the host via the RSS feed. Kind of like a commercial. Here are some podcasting stats. 546 million podcast listeners globally. So there's plenty for all of us. If we only get 1 in 1,000 podcast listeners to even consider our show, that's 546,000 people. 47% of US adults listen at least one podcast a month. That's pretty good that we can get at least that much. 71% of plays happen within day one. So that suggests you want to be consistent with launching or dropping podcast episodes. Your regular audience will be about 34% at least one time a week. And that same audience will listen to at least 3 separate podcasts in that week period. Radio The audience is mostly made up of independents. This is a huge misconception that conservatives are the only ones in talk radio. That is not true. Your listeners can be made up of people who wear suits or blue collar. In fact, that's also true for the presenters. And they're made up of men and women. Podcast and radio listeners are brand loyal people, meaning that the commercials they hear are likely the products they're going to use. They're also supportive broadcasters, meaning people like the late Paul Harvey and Howard Stern actually use the products that they advertise. And by the way, so do I. In 2022, podcasting ad revenue consisted of $1.8 billion. It will be an estimated $4 billion by this coming year. If you were to drop 3 shows or episodes of your podcast per week, every 1 hour has about 6 minutes of advertising. That would mean 18 60-second ad spots per week. Now, that's very simple math. Sometimes you'll sell a 30-second commercial, a 45-second commercial, or a 15-second commercial. But if you keep that ratio, you'll have 18 60-second spots per week with 3 episodes. Smaller radio stations sell those spots for $43 per spot. Say you're going to sell them for about $25 a spot. That would be 18 spots times $25, giving you $450 per week. Or if you take 2 weeks off, that gives you $22,500 in a 50-week year. This works in radio too. In fact, you just created a second income stream. If you're selling those spots for your podcast, you can sell those spots separately in radio. And that's what I just said. Sell your ad spot here, then sell it separately here on the radio side. If you do what's called burn it in, meaning you do the commercial yourself or insert it while you're recording, that means it's part of the episode. You might as well leave it there. But what you can do is charge double or some sort of increased rate because of covering more than one destination. Radio, you can start off with listeners simply due to a valuable time slot. For example, my show is at 11 a.m. every day. Over the lunchtime is a very popular time to be on the radio. I can start at a new station and easily get thousands of listeners from day one without anybody knowing who I am. Self-simulcasting is when you are the distributor or distributing agent, meaning you're responsible for getting your show onto other platforms so it can be heard by a larger audience. Get your show on as many internet and podcast directories as possible. When I say internet directory, I'm talking about an internet radio directory. Just like podcasts, You can go to Spotify, Apple, etc., to find a different podcast. You can also go to these platforms to find different internet radio stations. In fact, terrestrial radio stations also usually broadcast over the internet, and you can find them on these directories as well. Get yourself on as many terrestrial brokered radio stations as you can afford. What's that mean? Remember, terrestrial is AM and FM. Brokered radio means that the owner or management of the station sells the time, the airtime, to a producer like you, just like they would a commercial. They don't hire DJs. They don't say what goes and what doesn't go on. You do. As long as your show meets some sort of general requirement or format of the station, they don't care what you put on, just so long as you don't get them violated by the FCC and that ultimately you do bring listeners to the station. Brokered radio is when a terrestrial station sells their airtime to other producers just like you. Simulcasted radio is when one broadcast reaches multiple destinations, radio or whatever, at the same time. Syndicated radio. Syndicated radio is when one episode is played at multiple times throughout the day on different stations, or even different days. Yes, I am both simulcasted and syndicated. Here are some other considerations for you. Audio only, like radio, even though my radio show has a camera in it, and I'm on as many, even more video destinations or platforms as I am radio stations. Visual aids to support the video. Before we got flooded out during Hurricane Helene, one of the extra bedrooms in my house was actually my studio, and the entire wall behind me was painted green. That's called a green screen. The camera does not recognize that color during certain programming, and that allows you to put whatever you want behind you. That's usually how the weatherman shows the map and the satellite photos of where clouds are going, things like that. And then, of course, the audio and video equipment, microphones, cameras, monitors, the computer itself, things of that nature. What's going to work for you? If this interests you, we offer consulting work at Mastiff Media. We can help you start your podcast and or your radio show and just get it into a broadcast. Get it out there and let it be seen and or heard. You can reach us by email, news, NEWZ, at yergz, YERGZ.com. Or give us a call, 1-888-88-YERGZ. My name is Ross Yergz Yerger, and I'm your host today. Hope to see you again. Here's where you can reach me. Yergz, YERGZ, at yergz.com. And during any of the shows that I host or co-host. Up the middle on Wednesdays is called Translating Trump. Then there's Up the Middle throughout the week. On Monday, it's also called Both Sides Now. Translating Trump, I'm joined by Philip Blackett. who is a Harvard educated author and Trump supporter. Both sides now, I'm joined by one of my junior high English teachers, Jane Stahl. We look at things from the life and everyday life from both sides, male, female, one generation versus another, although we usually agree on other things, most things. Up the Middle can be heard Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. London time on Fridays. To find out where, go to mastiff.media. .media is like .com, .net, .org, .edu, .gov, etc. It is an extension for web addresses. So my company, Mastiff Media, is also the web address, mastiff.media. Hope to see you and or hear you on the airwaves somewhere. Thanks for watching.